Welcome to today's session. My name is Eric Pradham. As I think most of you know, I work for Big Wide Sky. At Big Wide Sky, I do a little bit of COO work. I do a little bit of marketing work. I do a lot of strategy. I do some coaching, mentoring, other stuff like that. Um, at Big Wide Sky, we tend to deal with challenges around vision and helping organizations conceptualize of hard to understand problems and challenges that they encounter so that when they're dealing with new and novel circumstances, whether it's around technology or process or change or culture or any number of things, that they can understand the the challenge that they're facing and then also develop some diagnosis or way of approaching that thing. Um, as we get going in this session, I want you to ask yourself uh, a question. I want you to ask yourself why it is that you're interested in the topic of information curation and how to deal with all the ideas or action items or to-do lists or whatever it is that you deal with every day. And let's just assume for the moment that maybe your answer of why you're interested in the topic is that maybe you feel overwhelmed. Maybe your answer is that you feel like you're missing opportunities. Perhaps you believe you're disorganized or any number of other things. Many of you are likely familiar with the 5 whys exercise, and I would like you, even just for yourself, to go through a 5 whys exercise on your reason for being interested in information curation. So, for example, if perhaps your interest in this topic is that you feel like you're disorganized, well, under the 5 whys, you'd ask, well, why is that? And maybe your answer to that question is that you feel like you can't keep track of anything. Okay, again, why? Maybe it's because you get a sense that people don't feel that they can rely upon you. Again, why? Um, Perhaps you feel that people cannot rely upon you because you don't get done what you say you do, or that you forget too many things, or that you're easily distracted, or any number of other things. I can pretty much guarantee you that at the end of the chain of whys, we're nearly always going to get to the fact that you want to get something done because you want to be a certain type of person and you're not achieving that goal. For example, maybe you want to be a better parent or partner. Maybe you want to make more money in your job. Perhaps you want to feel more valued by the people around you. Information curation is only one part, but I'm going to argue that it's a very important part to achieving many goals or visions that you have for yourself. And I hope today to give you a framework or prescription that you can then take and modify to make the most sense for your circumstances. Now, I'm going to, let's see if I can figure out how to do it here. I'm going to open a poll, and hopefully you all are seeing this. Basically, on a scale of 1 to 10 or 0 to 10, 1 or 0 being the worst, 10 being the best, how well do you feel you make use of all of the brainstorms, the ideas that you have, the input that you get from other people, the things that come to you from books or videos, the ideas that you have of, oh yeah, I need to do that thing, and just all of the other kind of information that you encounter every day. How well or poorly do you think generally you make use of those things? So we've got a handful of answers in here. And let's see, it doesn't give me an average, but let's see if we end the poll, where did we end up? We we have a range. So, we have some folks saying that they're down at they on a score of 0 to 10, uh, they make a use, good use of things. They're at about a 3. We do have some folks that are at 7, 8, 9. I'm gonna say we're probably around an average of 60 to 70%, let's say. So there's certainly opportunity for us to improve when you think about all the ideas that we encounter, all of the tasks that we need to keep track of, whether we're talking about work or we're talking about, parenting or who knows what. There's opportunity for us to make better use of ideas and information as we go through our day, let's say. Now, hopefully you all are seeing this picture here of 3 gentlemen. If you're not seeing the main screen with these 3 guys here, would you please just put in the chat and let me know? Hopefully I'm not sharing my notes view, but rather, the presentation. Um, if you recognize the person on the left, please put his name in the chat and let everyone know. If not, we'll get to it. I'm going to assume that most of us recognize the gentleman in the middle, and there are probably a handful of us that recognize the guy on the right. If you happen to recognize some of them, then my question is, what are some of the differences between them as it relates to how they handle information, to do tasks, and so on? Well, on the left-hand side, we have Stephen King. Stephen King has consistently published 2 to 3 books per year throughout his career, and as I think you probably know, even if you're not a Stephen King fan as I am, these are not small books. We're talking about things like The Stand, which is well over 1,000 pages, and he has published consistently throughout his career multiple of those books, long books, 2 to 3 times per year throughout his career, and that's in addition to reviewing other books, speaking, and every other thing that he has to do as a writer, as someone who's well known in the space, as someone who's written for TV, and so on. Now, in the middle, in addition to having one of the most successful TV shows ever, Jerry Seinfeld is also one of the most consistent comedians and generally sort of creators in Hollywood. Unlike many creative people, he didn't just have a few hot years and then flame out and you never hear from him again. He's been able to be, again, I'll use that word, consistent throughout his career. Now, on the right-hand side, if you don't recognize him, this is George R. R. Martin. He's done a lot of great things, but he famously has taken over 12 years now to publish his next book in the series, A Song of Ice and Fire, or if you're not familiar with that, then you probably know it by its, let's call it TV name, A Game of Thrones. That's it's based on the series, A Song of Ice and Fire. And as I said, he's taken 12 years now to write the next book. In an interview with between George R. R. Martin and Stephen King, Stephen King said that he's able to publish so much because he's organized his life and work in such a way that he can write 6 pages every day, which he has found is his sort of threshold for where he's able to produce the most value, feel the most fulfillment, and do what he believes is or make the best use of his time, whether it's for him, his family, or the world. If Stephen King is writing and he has a thought about an unrelated character or storyline, he makes note of it and he puts it in a place where he will go and deal with that later. Whether he's writing or he's doing something else, in his free time or whatever you might want to call it, if he thinks of he needs to do something, all the random thoughts that we have, like, oh, yeah, garbage day is tomorrow. I need to take out the garbage. Whatever it is that Stephen King thinks of, he makes note of that and he puts it in the place where that thing belongs so that he can go back to it at the time that's appropriate and deal with it then, rather than only dealing with it when it happens to be top of mind. By being organized and knowing where everything goes, Stephen King has said that he can ensure that he's best able to focus on the job that he has at hand, which for him is first and foremost writing 6 pages every day. He knows that if he writes 6 pages every day, he's writing a 300-page book or a 500-page book or whatever it is, he can reliably project when he is going to be able to finish his current project and produce the value that he believes is the highest, best use of his time. Now, in a documentary about Jerry Seinfeld, he tells a story that is fairly well known around, Jerry Seinfeld at the moment, sort of his history, let's say. He tells a story of sitting in a coffee shop multiple mornings and seeing people walk by every single morning going to work, whether they're construction people or secretaries or finance people or whoever they were, rain or shine, whether he could see on their faces that they wanted to go to work or not, consistently every morning they were going off to work. And he realized as he watched these people and wondered, why is it that people do that? Why is it that they don't go and sort of follow their dreams and follow their creativity or inspiration like people like me? Well, he realized this question of why a lot of comedians are hot for a year or two or three, and then they, as I've said, flame out and you never hear from them again. Many of the comedians that he was around, and Jerry Seinfeld at the time as well, work only when they're inspired. And so when they have an idea in their head, they get the sort of, the stereotype of the painter or artist or whatever it is that you see in TV or movies. And they have this flash of inspiration and then the paint's flying and, they're going all over the canvas or whatever it is. But inspiration is not super reliable. And perhaps when you have a flash of inspiration or you have a creative thought or you remember that you need to do something, you might not be in the best possible position to take advantage of it. So Jerry Seinfeld wondered, how is it that these people, whether it's a construction worker or whoever it is, and I believe the story he talks mostly about the construction workers, why is it that these people are able, or how is it that they're able to get up every day and go to work, whether they want to or not, and they're able to produce either individually or as a group really great things over time consistently? And he took this inspiration to begin not just making notes of the jokes that would come into his head, which he's also talked about in another documentary, but also organizing them into binders so that he has a place to go back to when he says, "Didn't I think about this one time?" Or I'm thinking about an idea around whatever it is. Well, he has a place that he's organized his jokes into, his work into, but also he took this as inspiration to essentially begin writing jokes from 9 to 5 and treating it like a job that other people who are much more consistent and build careers do, that he treated it like I'm getting up every day and going to work. Now, conversely, George R. R. Martin is famously very talented and very smart. He's published a lot of famous books, even before Game of Thrones and all of that. But he has stated that he doesn't keep many notes or anything really outside of his head. He tries to carry and craft everything that he needs to do, whether it's about his work or something else in his head. So I will tell you that I'm not surprised that he can write several bestsellers, but then get stuck and not be able to deliver on his highest, best use, his greatest value. He's asking his brain to do something that it's not evolved to do, which is not just to, for example, recognize, like have an idea or recognize an opportunity or remember to do something to orient on interest, value, or danger, or whatever it is, but also then to dredge up those ideas later on and to think analogically about them or to really refine them and so on. What he needs to be doing is getting his ideas out of his head where, you inside of your head, you do things that are uniquely human, like identify things, but get the things out of his head and put them in a place where you can bring them back up on command. Now, one study found that the average person has 6,000 different thoughts per day. Let's uh, let's just say that even 1% of those things are things that you should take action on. That's 60 things every day. And now, how many of us can really say that we think about and take action on 60 things every day that are more important than something like "Oh, yeah, I need to start dinner," or "Hey, it's probably time to leave for soccer practice," or "I need to remember to send an email to this person." All of those are probably things that you need to do, and let's just say that those are half. of the 60 quote unquote valuable ideas that you have, well, you still have another 30 ideas that are interesting, that are to-dos, that are tasks, that are action items that you need to take action on. And I think if we were to poll the group here, I doubt that many of us could say that we actually take action on or make the best use of 30 ideas every single day, despite the fact that we have these ideas, or we are reminded of things, or we find something interesting 6,000 times per day. Whether we're talking about a creative idea you had, remembering to do the thing that you and your coworker talked about, a question maybe that your spouse asked you that you need to follow up on. Perhaps it's something that you heard on a podcast that you were curious about, or any number of other things. Our minds have an amazing ability to filter and recognize interesting and potentially valuable information, but we do not have an amazing ability to hold on to that information. So we need to get it out of our heads and into a place and a form that makes all of those ideas and action items and so on useful, so that we can do what we uniquely do, which is identify, think analogically, think critically, and so on. As I'm going through this and some other people have joined us, please do, if you have questions, comments, anything else, please do use either the webinar chat or the Q&A function. Um, if you have an idea and you want to chat, I believe that I can unmute you. So please, if you have something, go ahead and just add it wherever is appropriate, and we'll deal with that as we go. Um, I've always been a high sort of throughput person. Just as an example, when Twitter was new, I was tweeting sometimes, 50 times per day, and those were largely a lot of sort of new things. I'm not saying that they were profound by any means, but I was looking at, you know, news and jokes and interesting ideas and any number of other things just constantly. So, I wasn't taking photos of my food, let's say, and just sharing that. I was sharing new things that I was thinking about or being exposed to. I was interacting on Reddit constantly, and I was working a lot. When I did my MBA, I had 4 part-time or contract jobs all at one time in addition to going to work. So I was exposed to a lot of information. I was always, thinking about a lot of things and so on. But one of the things that I suffered from was a difficulty of buckling down and working on the things that needed to be worked on, rather than just the things that I was inspired by or that were capturing my attention at the time. And honestly, a big part of it for me was not a lack of ideas or exposure to information. It was an inability to make use of all of those things. Now, I actually wrote this down because a former boss of mine said this to me once, and I felt like it was such a great learning experience. He said, "You're so dang smart, but you're not as valuable as you could be because you're not organized and you're not focused on the things that are most important to get you to your goals." And that really stuck with me. And I shared this screenshot of from Goodreads of the number of books that I've read in the last decade, because it's just one hint at a change that has gone on for me of going from being a creative, information seeking, novelty seeking person to someone that I think is still like that, but I believe now is able to better handle all of that information and all those ideas and so on. According to Goodreads, for example, I read 53,000 pages last year, but the quantity is really not the most important measure. It's what I got done or didn't get done as a result of that time and attention spent. So take this, for example. The average American watches 1,000 hours of TV per year, according to Nielsen, streams 1,150 hours of video, according to Forbes, and spends 918 hours on social media, according to Statista. But what you spend your time on is not nearly as much of a question as what you do as a result of the time and attention spent. I still watch TV shows and movies. Just this morning, I watched Lawman Bass Reeves while I was exercising, and I did that. instead of, for example, listening to an audiobook that I could have used to make me a better worker, a better spouse, a better parent, whatever it happened to be, while driving my kids to soccer the other night, I listened to music like any average person rather than putting on a podcast or some self improvement book or whatever it is. The holier than thou productivity crowd would ask you to squeeze out any activities that they do not deem worthy. And while I sympathize with the idea that maybe there is a threshold past which you've watched enough hours of The Golden Bachelor, or beyond which you really don't need to read another article about Travis Kelce or Taylor Swift, I believe that to integrate yourself best into your work and community and culture and your family and so on, you can still balance things like entertainment that could seem frivolous with production or function or usefulness. So you don't have to separate the world yourself from the world or make yourself different, as a lot of the productivity systems or growth hacker bros or whatever it is would say that you need to do. Um, Now, I'm going to open another question here um, while I get into this raft system that I have developed around, making the best use of information. Um, so the question is around what sort of productivity systems or approaches have you taken to handling your productivity, your to-dos, or just ideas that occur to you? And we'll come back to that in a second. Um, Before I get into the system that I have developed for making sense of all the information that I encounter, I will say that I arrived where I am without having gone through many of the other, at least not gone deeply into many of the other productivity hacks or other systems that are popular with some people. I know that there are things like the Pomodoro technique, bullet journaling, getting things done, and more out there. But honestly, I always felt like those systems asked me to accommodate myself and my behavior too much to those systems. Like I was wrapping myself around an unfamiliar workout machine, or they were asking me to fit myself into a driver's seat in a car that was just completely foreign to the way that my body was built. And if so, I never really got very far with those systems. If you find some methods work for you, then more power to you. And if you find that the raft method that I'll talk about doesn't fit you, I could totally understand. This, however, is the one system that I believe requires the least change for most of us and provides the biggest benefits. And let's see, I think we got some answers in here for what interesting. So, some of the questions we got physical notes, notes on the phone, uh, using a screen time app. Um, Sidekick productivity browser was mentioned. That's interesting. I haven't heard of that one. So, uh, I would love, whether you put it in the chat, like a link or some description, or we take a look later. I haven't heard of that one, but notes, physical notes, or notes on the phone. We're going to talk about that pretty much immediately. And the screen time app, is an approach to, let's say, limiting distractions for the most part, as I understand it. But if you have other input or ideas around, how to deal with productivity, to dos, ideas, tasks, please do put them in the chat. Now, as I've already mentioned, it's common for all humans to be listening to something, thinking about something, driving, um, or any number of other things, and either have a thought like, that's interesting, or I could use that. But where most of us fall down is actually making note of that thought or action. Um, and so the first part of raft is record. And basically, what we want to do at this point is use your brain to orient on and identify what is most valuable, and then uh, get it out of your head. So, first things first, to take advantage of your brain's orienting abilities and not have to recall things later on command or immediately divert your attention from the thing that you should be focused on at the time. The one tool that you need for Raft is a notes app. If you don't use one already, I recommend, just as we're going through this, you download one or open one now if you have one on your phone or your computer, and create a note that you call record. And I'll give you some examples of how I do the things that I'm talking about. Then, as you have ideas related to this topic that we're talking about here or anything else, you just make note of those things in the record note. You don't have to edit. You don't have to refine them. You just take the idea that you have, even if the idea is like, oh, yeah, I need to remember to do something totally unrelated. Just make note of it in your notes app on your phone, your laptop, whatever it happens to be, and just get it out of your head. If you do use a system like Apple Notes, OneNote, Evernote, or anything else, I'd recommend that at the record step where you've identified something, you have the idea, or someone says to you, "Hey, do this thing," or you've oriented on action item to do, idea, whatever it is. I'd recommend that you err on the side of recording more rather than less, because most note-taking apps are searchable. So even if you get bogged down later on in too many things to look through, you can search for them. So I don't have it up anymore, but someone said, paper notes or notes on the phone, and you prefer, I believe it was notes on your phone, because um, it's more accessible, and there were some other things in your comment. I agree with you, because I will keep notes periodically on Notepad, or I used to keep notes on a whiteboard, and then of course I get to pages and pages of notes, and there's a physical process of refining them. If I'm away from home, I don't have that anymore unless I carry it with me. Whereas with a notes taking app like Apple Notes on your phone, for example, you always have it with you. And on top of that, it's searchable. Now, um, I I've said it already. I use Apple Notes because I have an iPhone and I use a Mac, and it's easier for me to have shared notes with my wife, which is actually how we handle groceries, holiday planning, and other things, because she uses an iPhone and a Mac too. Um, what I encourage you to do is choose a notes app like Apple Notes or OneNote. Ensure that it's installed on both your phone and your computer, and then create one or more notes for recording everything. As I said, a record note. And this place begins, your record note begins as uh, a catalog of all of those things that you might call random, that just random ideas that you have or encounter. And that's okay. At this point, you're just recording things. You're not filing them away. You're not organizing them. You're not refining them, nothing like that. If you are in, let's say, a whiteboarding session and you want to retain what was on the board, you take a photo, and at least initially, because you're probably moving on to other stuff, you just put it in your central record note. If you're driving to work and you have a thought, you turn on talk to text and enter it, whatever the thought is, into your record note. Initially, you put everything into your record note, because part of the mistake that many of us make is we have an idea and we have to stop whatever it is we're doing to do a little bit of refinement or arranging or development of that idea. Under Raft, all you're doing is just getting the idea out of your head, and you will go back to it later. If I'm listening to a book and they mention a book that sounds interesting, I put it into my record note. If I have a thought about comparing two different ways of going about strategy or messaging, I put it into my record note. Almost everything goes there. And generally, when I'm not putting things into my record note, it's when I've already mentally gone to the next step in the process, which we'll get to in just a minute. But for just real quick, I want to illustrate, for example, let's say that you are on the go, and hopefully you all can see my screen. As soon as I go to screen sharing, it uh, all my screen goes black here. So I hope that you all can see this. Let me drop out of this. Were you all able? Somebody put in the chat. Were you able to see my phone screen there? I went into screen sharing with my phone. Yes? No? Yes. Okay, awesome. I'm gonna go back to that real quick. Um, so let's just say that I'm driving to work and I'm listening to a podcast or an audiobook, or I have just a random idea that has come to me. I happen to keep the notes app on uh, the main screen on my phone, so it's easy to open that up. Generally, I will keep the record note up first. So again, imagine you're driving and you have an idea. You're probably not going to want to be clicking through a bunch of stuff on your phone. So I do tend to keep this up first. Um, and so I'm listening to a book and they mention another book. I might very well just do something like turn on talk to text and say, look up XYZ book. So, at this point, obviously I misspoke a little bit. That's okay. At the record phase, it does not matter that things are correct. It matters that we get them out of our head and we can go back to them later. Perhaps there's a quote at that I want to remember, and so I might say something like, "I was listening to." I was watching a documentary recently, and they mentioned this quote from Harry Belafonte that the statement that he made prior to Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech, and I thought that that related to some of the things that I do. So I turn on talk to text, I'm driving, or I'm busy with something else, and I just say, "Look up Harry Belafonte quote about artists revealing us to ourselves." Or let's say that I am talking with my spouse, I'm in the middle of a conversation, I don't want to disrespect my wife or take my attention away from her, so I pick up my phone real quick, I make the note, I get it out of my head, and then I move on. There are plenty of other things that, you can do. If you prefer, you can, use Siri or Cortana or whatever it is that you have on your phone, and you can send yourself an email, you can send yourself a text, you can open up new notes. You need to adapt this to what makes the most sense for you. But, um, you know, what works for me is having a central record note. If I get into a circumstance where I need to send myself an email, well, that's another place to look. But at this point, again, I'm only just getting out of my head the thing that I need to do or the idea that I've had. After you've recorded something, the next step in Raft is what I call arrange, and this is going to sound time consuming, but it's not. All you have to do is look back at your record note when you're not actually recording something and decide where those notes go. So, for example, because I listen to a lot of books, I keep a spreadsheet of books that I intend to read. If I'm going through 150 books a year, it's just every, what is that? Every 2.5 days or whatever, I need a new book. So you know, I kind of need to keep a list. I could keep it in Goodreads or somewhere else, but I just keep a spreadsheet. Um, in that spreadsheet, I have information about the books. I have the title, the author, the year it was published, if it's a high priority book for me or not, if it's audio, ebook, or whatever else. When I'm at the arrange step, though, I'm likely to just do something as simple as move my note from record over to where I keep the notes about the books that I'm interested in. Now, in this case, it's a spreadsheet. Similarly, I keep a spreadsheet of ideas, quotes, historical facts, and so on that I found particularly interesting. When I'm arranging, I'll just take that note about Harry Belafonte and I'll move it into that spreadsheet. I'm not doing any editing. I'm not fixing typos. I'm not refining it, nothing like that. I already mentioned groceries. With my wife, we have a shared list so that when we go to the store, we know what to grab. Initially, I'll probably just take a note like, remember to buy ginger, and I'll put that into my record note. Then later on, I'll arrange it into the shared groceries note with my wife. And now you're probably going to ask yourself, well, why don't you just put the book or the ginger into the right place immediately? And you can do that. And there are plenty of times that I do, but I'd recommend that you create a record note or have a central place where you put all of the things initially, because um, when you have something that's easier to access than anything else, it makes it so that when you don't always have time to recognize a valuable idea or, take care of an action item and put it into, I don't know, a task manager or whatever, at, at least you can get it down and not lose that idea so you don't get to a point where a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, you realize that you had an idea or a thing you were supposed to do and you didn't get to it. So, for example, if I'm driving, probably not going to click through my phone too much. As you saw, I'll just open the record note and I'll use talk to text or tell Siri to take a note or whatever else. And then later on, when I'm not driving, I'll put the groceries note, ginger or whatever it is, where it needs to go. If we have time at the end, I'll share with you how I handle arranging in a way that doesn't just create more work for me. But for the moment, the simplest way to put it is that you either schedule time, which I know does not sound fun. And that's one of the problems with a lot of productivity systems, in my opinion, is they ask you to, to change yourself and to change your schedule and so on. Um, or rather than scheduling time, you do your arranging during a time that you would otherwise not be doing anything else. So people will give you examples like you're waiting in line at the grocery store, you're sitting in on the sidelines of your kid's soccer practice, maybe you're in an elevator or something like that. But just think about all those times that you're tempted to pull your phone out of your pocket and look at something that doesn't need to be looked at. Like you're going to look at Facebook or Instagram yet again, or you're going to look at another story about what's going on in the NBA or I don't know what. Anytime that you would be tempted to pull out your phone, and it's not because you're doing something per se, just take a couple of seconds and say, oh, yeah, I had that idea. I'm not even refining it. I'm not really thinking about it. I just know that that thing is groceries. That thing is a work project. That thing is whatever. And you just move them and it goes actually quite quickly. Now, at this point, you've made note of something, you've put it in the place that it needs to go, but it's likely that you still have something that's unformed or disorganized. The frame step of raft is where we deal with some more organization, refinement, and so on. And besides working with the acronym raft, it's called frame because of what a photographer or a painter does when setting up a painting or a shot. This painter here, for example, has to decide how wide or narrow his view is going to be and what makes the most sense in his frame for the goal he's trying to achieve with the painting that he's painting. Similarly, when you have an idea that's maybe it's analogical or it's creative or whatever, and you think, uh, well, what would happen if I merged EOS's level 10 meetings with Alan Mullally's BPR meetings? Would that be useful for my clients? Or what would happen for leadership or oversight? The first thing that I do is I just get that out of my head and down into the place where I record those things. Later on, when I have a couple of seconds, I arrange that by deciding where it belongs. Does it belong in business projects? Is it something that I need to get to immediately? Is this a someday thing? Is it something I'm going to work on for a client? Do I need to do research? Whatever it is, answering questions like this tells me where those things go. At some point, though, I need to work that dough of an idea or a resource or whatever it is into an actual shape and determine what will fit into my bread mold of the useful space that I eventually have. If you're familiar with the subreddit or meme of shower thoughts, I think you know that not all of the ideas that sometimes feel revelatory or creative or visionary or otherwise useful, not all those ideas that we have are. So you will at this point throw some things out that you recorded because you thought that something was interesting and or you thought it was creative and you recorded it, you arranged it into the place that it needed to go. But then when you go back to work on the thing, you realize there's nothing here. That's okay. Part of the framing step is saying, I'm removing that from my picture. Um, More often than not, though, you'll shape the ideas that you've had or the tasks or the to-dos into what they need to become. So, for example, my CEO, Elliot, one day he was talking about making this dish, this recipe called burrito. I'd never heard of it before, but it sounded really interesting. I recorded that note, just the word burrito. Later, I moved that over into a food note that I have where I save links to recipes I like or intend to try. And then at the framing phase, I Googled recipes, found one that I like, and then saved that so that it was framed, it was ready basically for me to actually make use of it. In my example of level 10 meetings and BPR, this would be the time that I edit or adjust my notes so that it becomes actionable later, or I might even go so far as doing a little bit of research if that's the best use of my time. Whatever you do with your notes at this point, basically you're getting them ready for you to be able to take action on them. So you've gone from identification to, let's say, placement, to now we're working it, we're shaving off rough edges or whatever it is so that we can make use of that thing. And then finally, under raft, we get to transmit. By this point, you recognize something was important. You saved it, you recorded it, you went back to organize it into a place where it makes sense. So you arranged it, and then you reworked it, researched it, or refined it, or otherwise prepared it for use. So you framed it to fit within your picture. At the transmit stage, you're ready to use the information. In the case of a book name, you are ready at this point to grab the name of the book and go buy it, check it out from the library or whatever else it is. In the case of a recipe, you're ready to cook for your family. In the case of an interesting idea from a podcast that you listen to, you're ready to use that information. And this is the time where you've gone from reception or generation of something to, or I should say initial inception of something to digestion of that thing. And now you're finally getting to the expression phase. And this is the raft method where you're trying to get out of your head all of those things that are interesting, creative to-dos that occur to us. And often for leaders and creative people and visionaries, we end up losing those things and missing out on opportunities. Now, most of what I've described is procedural. As I've said, we all naturally identify things that are interesting, but most of us don't do the recording and getting it out of our head. We don't do, at least in an organized fashion, some arranging, some framing, and then some transmission, unless we're dealing with something that happens to be on our mind at the time. So we're falling victim to more of that, Jerry Seinfeld comedian sort of thing that he was like in the past, or the George R. R. Martin thing, trying to carry everything in our head. And as a result, a lot of us miss out on opportunities that we could have, which is especially problematic if we believe that we are valuable, creative, productive, visionary people, which I think most people are. And if you happen to be creative, if you happen to be lower in conscientiousness, if you happen to be a visionary, or you just deal with a lot of stuff, then it's very likely that despite the fact we could be and do more, that there are people who feel like maybe they can't rely upon us or we're too distracted or whatever else. And you can use raft. And then I'm going to give you a little bit of a structure here that I call car, to make better use of what your brain naturally does. Now, I only talked a little bit about how I actually organize the stuff that I do. So I just talked about, a spreadsheet and a record note. So you can organize things in any way that you want. That main step is get it out of your head and then go back to it later. But I'm going to share with you the structure that I use so that you can model it if it feels like it makes sense, and then mold this idea. You can adapt it to fit your circumstances. In my case, I call this car. So we have raft for behavior, we have car for structure. I know it's very creative. Hopefully, you all appreciate that. Um, in the case of car, I'm going to go back to this screenshot of my notes taking app. Car stands for current is the C, uh, archives is the A, and R is the resources. Um, current is anything that I'm currently working on. This is my record note. I have a separate to-do list. It's any projects that I'm currently working on. So I have an IP address list project that I was working on because I had a hacking issue that I dealt with. Recently, we have a daily sales meeting at Big Wide Sky. So I have an update about events and so on in there. I had notes about the webinar because that's a project that I'm currently working on. Hopefully you can see in here, I have subfolders for other projects where it's more complex, the things that I'm working on. Archives, that's anything that any ideas, things you've worked on in the past, notes you've taken that whether you completed them or not, ideally you save as much as possible there because you're exposed to things or you have ideas and it's not until 2, 3, 10 years later that something related to that comes up, and to have to do all of your research and go and find all of your resources at that time uh, can create additional complications and result in you not doing as much work as you and producing as much value as you could. So if you keep archives of everything, then this allows you to not start from ground zero every time. Now, if you're paying attention, you'll notice that I have a couple of folders under here, but I only actually have one note, and the reason is really sort of twofold. One is that by nature, I'm a delete happy sort of person, so I fall victim to the fact that when I'm not using something, I tend to just delete it. That's a problem that I have to get over. The other thing, though, is I have a relatively well-developed file system on my computer that I've been using for a long time now, 15, 20 years, something like that. And then also at Big Wide Sky, we have a fairly well-developed file system. So for the most part, the projects that I'm working on have places to where I can put those things when I'm done with them that is not in my archives, because I tend to use my notes actually more for the current projects and the resources that are not projects in and of themselves. For me, a lot of photos for family things, for example, go in photos. A lot of projects for work, PowerPoints or whatever they happen to be, go into a file system. I do keep this here though, because um, it's a good place to be able to go back to if you don't have a well-developed file system or whatever it happens to be. And then the final part of CAR is resources. This is one of the most valuable pieces, at least for me. um, Under resources, this is anything that's not necessarily a project that you need to be able to use to contribute to other things. So I mentioned recipes. I keep notes around recipes that I like or intend to try. The grocery list with my wife is in there. For work, I'm a certified coach in the Grow model. So all of the assets, PowerPoints, PDFs around coaching are kept in resources. When I encounter messaging systems or I go to a conference and someone gives a presentation on strategy that I really like, I get their PowerPoint or their PDF, or I make my notes and I drop it into the resources. And I actually end up going back to this constantly because when I'm writing an article or a LinkedIn update or whatever it is, I'll remember, oh yeah, I have something about messaging, and I'll go back and use that resource. And I have access to it, whether it's on my phone or my computer or whatever else it happens to be. So, CAR is really pretty simple. It's a structure for organizing the information you encounter. Whether you do it in your notes or you do it in a file system or whatever it happens to be, you can split these things up a little bit, but keeping a hold of all of the stuff that you get out of your head or that you find that you might be able to use is the most important piece there. Um, and then Raft is a way of handling information. As I said earlier, there are many ways that you can handle productivity. Frankly, I've just never found uh, one that was to my liking because I found that a lot of the note taking or productivity systems ask me to try and wrap myself around a machine basically that doesn't naturally fit my body or doesn't fit the way that I think a lot of people work. Um, your brain is exceptionally well adapted to orienting on things of value, things of interest, things that you're curious, weird, or dangerous. But once it's done focusing on that thing, your attention and most of your functional memory moves on to other things. And as a result, too many people that are smart and capable just miss out on too many opportunities, whether we're talking about being more valuable at work, being a better parent, or whatever it happens to be. And so if you can mold Raft or Car to your specific circumstances, I believe that you can find that you can handle and achieve more with without having to get a new journal, cut out TV, keep a calendar on your desk, listen to audiobooks at quadruple speed, or whatever else it happens to be that the productivity hackers would deem worthy of your time and attention. So uh, we've hit the end of the slides here, and I'm going to put some things here in the chat. We have a another webinar that is a little bit more related to the more visionary and big picture challenge stuff that Big Wide Sky does, coming up on March 8th. Our last one, we had over 200 people registered, and a large number of those people joined us. So I recommend that you come to experience something that's a little unusual and not like what you would experience with many other strategists or other consultancies. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. If you have questions, challenges, whatever it is, you can let me know. And so at this point, if anybody has thoughts on what you have done, things that you found valuable, I encourage you to put it in the chat or raise your hand or whatever it is, and I can unmute you and we can have a conversation about this. And if not, then I thank you all for coming. I hope you'll join us on March 8th. And thank you again for being here. If you have questions, please do raise your hand.